I want to welcome everyone to actually the second day of the WECAN Climate Justice Forum, Facing the Climate Emergency on the Road to COP27, Solutions and Perspectives from the Global Women and Gender Diverse Leaders. And of course, we're doing this, as you heard, during the Climate Week and the UN General Assembly here in New York. And again, I'll introduce myself. For those of you who don't know, I'm Osprey, Orielle, and I'm the Executive Director and Founder of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN. And I'm really honored to be here on Lenape territory, and I really want to honor the Indigenous peoples here and the ancestors here. And I'm also very thankful for all of the incredible organizing team. I wanted to mention Catherine Quaid and Ashley Bardardo and Harriet Sugarman from Climate Mama and all the volunteers who helped us out today. Thank you so much for being here. So important to recognize the people behind the scenes to get us all into this room. I wanted to thank you all so much. And let's all just take a deep breath and remember the beautiful earth under our feet, somewhere down there underneath the pavement, and the beautiful sky overhead, and just put ourselves in the context of nature. We all know we're really at a choice point for humanity. The IPCC reports confirm what we all know to be true, that if there's no significant action on the climate crisis, it will continue to escalate. And as we just heard from Phil, it means communities like hers, entire nations, can go underwater. Hi, Jade, come on up. There's a seat right here for you. Welcome, and thank you for making your way through whatever you made your way through to get here.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Please have a seat. Just take a breath and relax, and all is good. There's no question with what we're seeing, with what's happening with floods and fire and drought, why our children are out on the street. The youth are out there hollering at the top of their lungs, climate emergency, climate emergency. And every day we can see, in our own communities, so much devastation and people losing their livelihoods and lives. Because yes, we are in a climate emergency, and it's something that people don't like to say out loud, but it's important that we claim this moment for what it is. As the world prepares for COP27 in Egypt, we know that solutions exist that can mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis. It's not that we think we're going to magically stop the climate crisis, but we can make it a lot less impactful and harmful. We know that women, feminists, and gender diverse leaders are leading the way. We know that statistically, and you're welcome to go to our website and see a lot of research that we've done and many others that show why women are central to resolving these issues. And this is why we're hosting this Climate Justice Forum, to uplift women and community-led solutions, strategies, policies, and frameworks. It is code red for humanity, and we are drawing a red line to say no more sacrificed people, and no more sacrificed countries, and no more sacrificed zones. This is a time to unite together to build the healthy and equitable future we know is possible for each other and the earth. Because that's what's amazing about this moment with these interlocking crises. We actually can have an opportunity to build the world that we want. And that's what I really hope everyone will walk away with today, is that crisis can also be a doorway to what it is that we know is the world that we want to live in. So I also wanted to bring our attention to a lot of the frontline women leaders that are putting their bodies on the line every day to protect the land and forests and water, and to honor them also while we are in this space together. There is a historical connection to the violence against women and violence against Mother Earth that we cannot afford to ignore, and it needs to be healed, and that's part of the work that we're engaged in. So I ask you to join me in celebrating and standing in solidarity with our movements around the world, rising as caretakers and as protectors and defenders of our precious planet and our communities. Nature has made it crystal clear that we cannot buy or negotiate our way out of these multiple crises. So it's critical to radically imagine a world that we know is possible. And I say this because, you know, when you're in a system that's faltering, it actually it creates like a crack in the system. And that's where we need to be, moving through the crack in the system and having our plans and our agenda be centered at this time. Importantly, the pressure and insight of global people's movements are central to pushing forward transformative and bold leadership right now, because we do not yet have the politics in place to tackle our multiple interlocking crises. So we're actually having to create our own DNA of what the future looks like, because our systems currently of capitalism, patriarchy, racism, colonization are not working. We need to draw upon the knowledge and leadership of frontline women and feminists who are already deeply engaged in solutions. And our forum today is calling for urgent action within a climate justice framework. And this week we have, through WECAN, released a call to action for all governments and financial institutions to take urgent action on the climate crisis. And it's based upon our Climate Justice Assembly signed by 120 organizations representing millions of people around the world. And you can go to our website to read in depth what this call to action is and a step-by-step analysis of what governments and financial institutions need to do to treat this moment the emergency that it is. Our call is also echoing many calls from the Global South for governments to endorse adaptation and loss and damage financing, which you heard Phil talking about. And I really had an amazing opportunity yesterday for our first panel of this forum to meet with African feminists. And they all echoed that cry that we need adaptation and loss and damage financing. And we want to stand with the African feminists and hear them. We are going to their homelands during COP27, and we need to center their voices and what they're calling for on the ground. Our call to action for gender justice, racial justice, upholding Indigenous rights and rights of nature, calling for a just transition, and immediately keeping fossil fuels in the ground is an ongoing agenda for people and planet. It's an urgent call for our very survival. False solutions, white supremacy, colonization, and patriarchy have no place in any climate action plan. Rather, it's imperative that governments and financial institutions adopt just transition and feminist policies and frameworks. We call on all governments also to respect the right to freedom of expression and peaceful protest, and to immediately halt the criminalization of land defenders whose efforts are central to a climate just world. This is something that is high on our agenda. We have to have the right to fight for our land, our water, our forests without being criminalized. We are rising and we're not waiting. We can act now and we must act now. So thank you for joining us in our struggle and our solutions together, and for joining us today. And I'm going to introduce our speakers. And hopefully that gave you a little time to collect yourselves. This is really a truly amazing group of leaders. I know them all. They're friends and colleagues and people who I look up to and admire deeply. Phil, Lisa Hussein, who you just saw, I will remind you, is a permanent representative to the United Nations and ambassador to the United States and the Maldives. And as I mentioned, just so people who came in late can understand, she only had a few minutes and needed to go back to her job and do her work this week. So we did a little one-on-one, and now we will continue with the panel. First, we're going to hear from Jacqui Patterson, who is the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project here in the United States. Thank you, Jacqui. And then we will hear from Farhana Yamin, who's the Associate Fellow, Energy, Environment, and Resource Program at Chatham House from the UK. Thank you. And you might have some other titles you want to add in. We did clear these titles through emails, but people are busy. So you may add to your titles as you wish. Then we'll be hearing from Jade Begay, who is Diné, and she is the Climate Justice Campaign Director for Indian Collective. here in Turtle Island, USA. Thank you, Jade. And then we will hear, last but not least, from Diana Duarte, who is the Director of Policy and Strategy Engagement at MADRE, also here, Turtle Island, USA. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really great to have you here. So we're going to just go ahead and start with you, Jacqui. Well, I've heard with these that you've got to like really hold them up to your mouth. It should be on and ready to go, and if not, I'll give you this. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Jacqui, please.
Thank you.
And just so you all know, our friend here has got time cards just to help everybody keep on time. Okay, please go ahead.
All right, thanks. Let's go 8 minutes ago?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So good to see you all, and good to thank you for giving us time to get settled here. So I thought I would, as Osprey said, I'm with the Chisholm Legacy Project, which is a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. And I thought I would give a little bit about some of the solutions that Black femmes are leading on, and then also talk a little bit about what needs to happen in order for folks to be able to be in their full purpose and leading. Because unfortunately, each of the folks that I'll describe are leading while pushing a boulder up a hill. And so we need to think about ways that we can ensure that the people are well and so leading, and yes, we can stand in our full power. So some examples of some of the great work that's happening. As we know, when we talk about the climate justice, we talk about this in the context of a just transition, transitioning away from an extractive economy into a living economy. And so we know what, I think Osprey has already given us a great kind of problem statement in terms of the state of where we are now. And some of the folks who are leading into the ways that we need to be going forward are leading on energy justice, are leading on food justice, are leading on land justice, are leading on democracy work, leading on water issues, water equity issues. And so I'll give you just a few examples from each of those areas, and again, some of the ways that we need to be thinking about ensuring that people are supported in so doing. So when we think about the situations that we're hearing of now with the water situation in Jackson, Mississippi, and in other places, unfortunately that's a situation where people had water and now they don't have water, and then there are many communities that didn't have water in the first place. So it's front page news because people had water and then they don't. But there's communities like San Branch, Texas, which hasn't had running drinking water since the mid '80s. Even though it's right outside of Dallas, one of the richest cities in the nation. There's folks that are certainly in various rural areas and in urban areas that are in similar situations. So we have some great folks who are leading on the solutions that we need, pushing back on water privatization, pushing forward on democratic water systems, pushing forward on ensuring that water is a human right for all. So we have people like Monica Lewis-Patrick, who's with We the People of Detroit, who is ensuring, making sure that we don't have water shutoffs in that area, making sure that there's a community water board. So again, there's democracy as it relates to the water system. When we look at places that people talk about this term food desert, a lot of people who are in those situations don't like the term desert because it implies something that occurs naturally. And we all know that the separation of people from food that they need for life is something that's quite intentional. It started back with the very beginning of this place called the United States, where it was originally taken. So we're on occupied territory throughout the country. And so from the time that people were driven away from their land to the time that people like Black folks were taken from their original lands in sub-Saharan Africa and brought over to be enslaved labor for the United States, and then the systems that were developed to ensure that people didn't have access to land and to food. And so we have great people who are leading on food justice now, people like Leah Penniman and Ife Kilimanjaro, who are the co-directors of the Soul Fire Farm in upstate New York, who are not only leading on that work for the communities that they're working in, but they're also leading on a new way that we can do food systems in general. So other people are now following in their example. We have groups like the Black Urban Growers who are helping to steer the way for folks to do that same type of work. When we talk about energy justice, we all know that and again, talking about our constituency in terms of Black communities, the Black communities are most likely to have their electricity shut off for non-payment. And to fatal impact in some cases, where people will use candles to light their home if their electricity has been shut off. And candles are one of the #1 causes of home fires. We've had people who have died as a result. We have people who have their oil and gas shut off, and then they'll use space heaters to heat their homes. And again, that's a #2 cause of home fire. So we have people dying from that situation. There's one young African-American boy who came into care. Hold on, who came into care in one of the trauma-informed nursing situations, and it was because he tried to commit suicide after his home burned down because his mom had used a space heater in his home, in his room, because she wanted to see him be warm in his home. And so these are the kind of situations that give rise to the work around energy justice and energy sovereignty and energy democracy, work that's being led by people like Jacqui from the Black Weeks of Water Coalition, who was working on ensuring that, again, there's a community-owned solar. People who are doing work around the home boys industries, which is doing work around having formerly incarcerated persons who are then actually being trained in solar and weatherization and retrofitting and so forth, so that we have energy efficient and energy sovereignty for our homes. And so I could go on and on with list after list, but with only about 2.5 minutes remaining, I will just give a couple of the examples of the types of things that we need to make sure that we put in place to clear the way for these awesome leaders to continue. One is that we need to get money out of politics. We need to de-link, we need to reverse Citizens United, we need to de-link the outsized influence that corporations have over our legislatures, our regulatory systems, our courts, so that people can actually have more space to do this type of work. We have people actively working against people owning their own, so we have people actively working towards water privatization. We have people working towards the displacement of people from their homes and from their land. So we need to get money out of politics first and foremost. Secondly, we need to ensure that we have avenues for well-being for people who are leading. Too often, people are just seen as workhorses, even by philanthropy. They'll give just enough money for people to be working around the clock and not being able to rest and be able to take care. So we need to ensure that we are equally valuing the kind of nuts and bolts of this work, and actually also valuing the heart and the well-being and the bodies of people who are doing this work. And then in my remaining 30 seconds, we also have to, as a movement, and ensure that we have movement care, that we have so many folks who are working from a trauma-informed place, and we ourselves within the movement end up hurting each other in some ways. And so we as a movement have to have a trauma-informed organizing, and also a culture of movement care and centering radical love in the way that we work with each other going forward. So that she doesn't have to put up the stop sign, I will stop there and let you pass on to the next one.
Thank you so much, Jacqui, for that incredible rundown of everything. And also, we will come back around so people have other time for comments, but just really appreciate the incredible work you're doing and what you're spotlighting. Thank you. Farhana, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ray. So I am a climate lawyer. I've been coming to the UN negotiations on climate change since 1991. So it's a long time. And part of me is hugely proud of the way in which vulnerable countries, vulnerable communities, those on the front lines have resisted inertia and have put in place legal frameworks that are universal. Every state has signed up to them, including the 1992 Climate Convention. We had then the Kyoto Protocol, which didn't command universal assent, largely because the US didn't sign up. And then we had the Paris Agreement, which the US played a huge role in, and which we then had 4 years of standing still and going backwards. And I had a bit of a spat yesterday at the New York Times stage with John Kerry, because I think the time's come for the developed countries, especially the United States, to acknowledge the degree of harm that's been caused by inertia And we've had literally 12 years, 4 with Bush and 8 with George Bush, 4 with Trump and 8 with George Bush, of climate denialism and wrecking the climate multilateral cooperation that comes. So that's like, 12 years out of the last 30. You do the maths yourself. That's a huge amount of inertia that was built into the system. And I want to pay tribute to women and the solutions that have been put forward by those on the front line. So I think the most important, missing, underrated solution is equality. We know that equality is a solution to the most important injustices, and those who are fighting for, whether it's gender parity or decent lives, decent work conditions, decent pay, the right to strike, the right to have control over our own bodies, all of these are necessary conditions for equality, and all of them are under assault after huge gains that have been made, led by movements from black and brown people, from women, from the labour movement. All of these are victories. And the same is true of the climate treaties, which time and time are being undermined as a result of their effectiveness. So I know in my heart, I also despair at the emissions rising, but the gap in the emissions that would have been emitted without those treaties and, as we call, pure business as usual, and what is there today is huge. We've made a huge contribution. That is why these laws are being attacked everywhere. I live and work in the UK, so we now have a government that, on the back of a national period of mourning for the Queen, basically opened up licensing in the North Sea, has said a green light to fracking. This is the United Kingdom. It's basically not on track and has not put in place policies to get to net zero by 2050, which was one of the first and most major acts of leadership taken, and it was only taken on the back of strikes by Extinction Rebellion, by Fridays for Future, by young people walking out. That is why the UK legislated net zero by 2050 in 2019, 4 years after Paris, and it only did that as a result of action from the ground. So I'm making these points because I think there's a great deal of resistance that needs to take place, and resistance is a form of solution. It is tackling the old, bad, corrupt, ineffective, and frankly, hugely damaging in terms of mental and physical health system. And everybody acknowledges that, but then, there's a sort of sense of it's all too big and we cannot change things. So I want to draw my, I don't know how I'm doing for time, so no card's been held, or at least I saw. Okay, so, sorry, my phone's gone and thing. So one of the roles that I decided to play recently is to work with foundations. So I've worked as a lawyer, as I said, and then I moved into philanthropy about 10 years ago and have had a number of roles. And at the moment I'm coordinating a project called the Climate Justice and Just Transition Donor Collaborative. And it's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially it's to try and get the philanthropies to fund climate justice aligned solutions, equality-based solutions, justice-based solutions. And I'm going to have to take my mask off because I can't, my glasses steam up. So philanthropy is doing a rubbish job, basically. We want it to do better. And the scale of the systemic injustices that it needs to tackle is vast, just like in the rest of society. And we think that around slightly more than probably 2% of global philanthropy is going to climate mitigation. Very little of that goes to adaptation, resilience. And 0.5% of that 2%, which is a tiny slice, goes to environmental initiatives in the global south. So those on the front line receive very, very little global philanthropy. And 95% of that amount is going to organizations led by men and led by white people. So the structural imbalances about who gets the money, who is recognized as a leader, who is seen as providing solutions that have the engagement, mobilization, inspiration, and buy-in of communities to demand a better world is really, really, really missing. And that's kind of what I'm working on, and hoping that philanthropy is not just the provider of resources, it also epitomizes everything that's wrong in the system. It's based on a system of extractive private wealth, and that we start to also dismantle, decolonize philanthropy. A lot of philanthropy capital is locked up in very, very extractive and bad business as usual businesses. So I wanted to bring that work and highlight that, because we need movement building. We need to get to the grassroots and national organizations. We can't just fund think tanks and campaign organizations. They do really, really important work, and they have to stand and serve and assist their allies on the front line in the global south and build, you know, alliances that are truly global. And I think we need to, most of all, weave together our different movements in ways that I think the youth are doing a great job actually in challenging us all to be more intersectional, to be more based on well-being, to be based on love and joy. And they've learned many of those lessons about avoiding burnout, about saying no, about rest, about prioritizing mental health as well as physical health, prioritizing inclusivity, including lessons from the disability and gay rights movement. So they're, I think, bringing together a truly intersectional lens, and it's time for us to allow those youth to flourish, and that's another big part of the missing picture. There's very little philanthropy goes to consistently supporting youth. We are applauding them a lot for what they're doing, but we're asking them to carry a lot as well, and providing very little funding. So I want to just say my personal thanks to Osprey and WECAN, because you convene so many brilliant gatherings and have been at the forefront of making sure that climate justice is seen as a solution, that equality is seen as a solution. So thank you for letting me have my 8 minutes.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Farhana. Really great analysis and great points that you're making. And also, I just really want to honor, you know, how hard Farhana has worked at the top levels of government and all that you've done, and then moving to the front lines. And you know, you're really an ecological thinker and activist, and it's really an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us. And I now will move to Jade Begay for your comments. Thank you, Jade.
Seeing which one works. Hello everyone, Duarte. My name is Jade Begay. I'm the Climate Justice Campaign Director at NDN Collective. And I just want to get a sense of the room real quick. How many in the room are, or do you identify as like an organizer? Cool. How about a funder or someone in philanthropy? That's great. What about, oh, I had another one here. Or, yeah, are you new to like the climate movement or environmental movement? Great. I always like to know just who's here. Cool. So, yeah, just bringing it back to the, like, I'm just reminding myself of, yeah, we're here to talk about the road to COP, and we're here in Climate Week, and for me, this is like a moment where, yeah, it's the kickoff essentially to COP in a way, like the way my mind is working, and it's an opportunity to share with you all and like our greater audience, you know, why we're here at Climate Week, and then what our priorities are moving into this bigger event, which is the COP, the Conference of the Parties, hosted within the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Climate Framework on Framework Convention on Climate Change. Yeah, acronyms. There's lots of them in the climate space. So yeah, before I go into, you know, some of NDN's and also our coalition's goals and ambitions and calls to action for COP27, I just want to share a bit about NDN Collective. So we're fairly new to the scene, although people like myself and my colleagues within NDN have been a part of the Indigenous rights space or in building Indigenous power for our whole lives and careers. So we're on Indigenous Peoples Day in October. We're turning 4 years old. So like I said, fairly new organization. But we're an Indigenous-led organization aimed at building Indigenous power. And we do that through our model. And so, lots of orgs have theories of change. The way I see NDN operate is that our organization, our structure, is the theory of change. So we are, in order to address the systemic problems that we see, be it climate change, be it racism, white supremacy, etc., we are taking a systemic approach, hence the name collective, NDN Collective. So we're made up of 4 entities. NDN Fund, which is a impact investment and loan arm, where we do just that. We give loans, and we actually, I love this arm of NDN Collective because we get to challenge government and say, look, we are skilled at moving resources in our community more so than you. and we get to do the same thing with philanthropy, actually. But this way we're able to give loans and function as what is known as a community development financial institution. So supporting regenerative, renewable energy projects, regenerative agriculture models, housing developments, so anything around the infrastructure side of things. So NDN Fund is one arm. We also have NDN Action, and so we have the capabilities of a C3 and a C4, which mean nonprofit, and a C4 status allows you to do like lobbying work or endorse politicians, and so that gives us a lot of agency and freedom to uplift the leaders we need, and right now we need good leaders, trusted leaders. We also have a philanthropic arm, and I'm happy to share that NDN is proud actually to share that NDN is now the largest led Indigenous fund in history in the US. And so we're really organizing within philanthropy specifically to open the doors to funding because we know that Indigenous peoples receive less than 4.04% of philanthropic dollars in the US, and that's got to change if we're actually going to deal with climate change, right? So those are the parts of NDN, and I just wanted to share that model because people can duplicate this model. We're not hoarding this model to ourselves. Like, actually, we're building this model in different regions across the US now, and we want this model to happen in each state. I mean, that's the big dream, but I just wanted to share what we're up to. As far as COP, there's a lot, and the reason why I asked who's in the room is because there's asks for different people, right? So I think when it comes to organizers, we need to work better, work more coordinated, so we have a united message. I see so many times we show up to this event and we're all over the place. We're saying we're just saying different things and it's fractured. So how can we work more closely and more coordinatedly, is that a word? To demand the things we need. And one thing I want to lift up as far as where I'm at is having our president declare a climate emergency. As far as funders, right now, what I'm seeing is that a lot of groups are really challenged with access and badges. So give up your access. Share your badges. That's like something you could do today, tomorrow. Influencers or people, who are maybe not quote unquote within the movement, but you have a social media account. Just lift up the voices of the front lines who are present there. Really take time to see who's around, and lift up those voices. We need that groundswell of people lifting up our calls to action and our demands while we're out there. It's one thing for us to be there and be in an echo chamber, but it's another thing if we have the support of all of you really lifting up what we're trying to put out. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jade. Thank you for the beautiful work you're doing in sharing your model. And it's interesting, in some of the sessions that we've had around preparations for COP, we've heard this request that you just made to amplify it again, that when we're at the COP, all of us are running as hard as we possibly can, going from meeting to meeting, advocating, pushing. And if people are not at COP, it is a great gift if you can uplift those social media messages and actions, because it's another way that we can all collectively put pressure on governments if we create a lot of social media buzz and effort, and it shows people care and are putting pressure collectively on governments coming from the front lines and the grassroots. So thank you for mentioning that. And with that, I'd like to hand the floor to Diana Duarte. Please take us away.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Duart, and I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Engagement for MADRE. I was saying to somebody a moment ago, this is like the first time in forever that I've been in a room with this many people, so I'm like over the moon and kind of giddy with excitement to be here with you all, so thank you for coming here. For those of you who don't know, MADRE is International Women's Human Rights Organization and Feminist Fund. We partner with grassroots feminist groups on the front lines of both war, armed conflict, and disaster, environmental disaster. And for decades, our partners who are leaders, Black and Indigenous leaders of women's groups, for the most part, have been sounding the alarm and have been really pointing to the harms of the climate catastrophe in their communities, and really, way ahead of when policymakers were paying attention to this. And not only have they been sounding the alarm about the harms, they've also been pointing to the root causes, what is underlying the crisis moment that we're all now in, and pointing directly at the global systems of exploitation that have gotten us to this point, and to the notion that sort of consumes us all, that we can pretend that we can extract and consume and pollute without end and without consequence. And it reminds me of a question that the Black feminist writer and intellectual Toni Cade Bambara once said, which is, what are we pretending not to know today? And I find that to be a really useful question. What are we pretending not to know today? Because it really helps to strip away the delusions that we may be laboring under. That can be comforting, no doubt, comforting to sort of wrap ourselves in the idea that we can continue on with our normal lives, business as usual, without facing, having to face up to these harsh realities. But what we're up against is that there's too much of this pretending not to know in our policymaking circles. It's one thing for it to be a defense mechanism for an individual, and it's another thing for us to see it operating at the level of climate policy, which is totally destructive. But for so many of the women, organizations, communities that we work with, there was no pretending not to know, because there is so much work to be done to confront the climate breakdown as it's showing up in their communities. And so for generations, we've been working with Black, brown, and Indigenous, rural women who've been doing the work not only of caring for their communities, but really for our entire planet. They've been preserving and exchanging seeds. They've been passing down traditional knowledge. They've been safeguarding the world's biodiversity. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with some of this work that was described on this panel as well. And they've been really living out and calling for a vision of a feminist, regenerative, transformed economy that is centered around care. And so when we think about this care work and this political analysis that folks like MADRE's partners are putting out into the world, it's regularly undervalued, invisibilized, even attacked, certainly excluded from a lot of the climate policy spaces that we are talking about, including the COP. And so at MADRE, the way we look at it is that we have both the opportunity and the responsibility to learn from the models that our partners have created, and alongside them to refuse to pretend, to refuse to pretend that the answer to the climate crisis is anything other than real transformation. I caught a little bit of that John Kerry conversation yesterday, and it reminded me of this point about what are some of the illusions that we continue, that some of the most powerful policymakers continue to labor under. And so I want to talk about two approaches that we've used in our work to get to this kind of transformation that I'm referring to. Like, what are some of the feminist approaches that can be activated in the service of influencing better and more just climate policies? So first is, we have to be able to build bridges between grassroots organizing and policy spaces. So for years, MADRE has supported our partners with funding and with technical support for them to be able to participate in international fora like the COP, but also to bring their vital policy expertise to other spaces. We've also organized delegations to US Congress so that our partners can be delivering their insights and expertise and policy recommendations directly, to influence US congressional debates. Because we really believe that in order to create the kind of policy change that we all need, we need to center the expertise of people in local communities who are experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis most directly. And so I want to share just like a couple of examples of some of the work that our partners are doing. Thank you. Partners in Palestine right now are creating urban greenhouses. They're growing food in kitchen gardens. They're creating sustainable economies for locally grown food. We partner with a group in Sudan who founded their country's first ever women farmers union. So they use that as a vehicle to create their collective power and to share tools and resources to sustain to support the sustainable farming that they're doing. And so these are the kinds of local feminist economies that are already seeded, they already exist around the world and can be used as models to be influencing and shaping policies. So when we organize congressional briefings as a platform for those partners to share their insights, partners from Nepal, from Kenya, from Tanzania, from countries all over the world, we're creating a space for them to be able to advance their bold and interconnected vision of what a just transition can look like. And they're also able to share how the oppression that they face because of their identities, for example, as Indigenous peoples, it not only cuts them off from the resources and support that they need to protect their basic rights and to access vital services, but that they are targeted oftentimes exactly because of their role that they play, as vital stewards of our ecosystems and of the planet and of communities. And so when we're able to create those channels, we can guide ourselves towards the kinds of policy proposals that we need. And I'll also point out that that's a really important role for international organizations and for philanthropy to play, is to fund the kind of coordinated advocacy work that is coming from the grassroots level and to create those kinds of shared platforms. And the second approach I wanted to make is that we can both reimagine and expand the human rights framework as a tool to better serve us all. I'm going to do this in 1 minute, I promise. So we already have an international human rights framework which can serve as sort of like a scaffolding or a blueprint for the kind of advocacy that we want to do. Human rights instruments have already codified certain rights to food, rights to water, land, health, development, self-determination. All of these are points that are very much in the service of the climate justice agenda. And those treaties are often attached to institutional spaces, committees, human rights bodies at the UN and otherwise, where these are spaces of struggle, where human rights activists and environmental activists can be pushing forward a climate justice agenda that is attached to legally binding commitments that countries have made all across the world. And so, one example that MADRE has been supporting is an effort coordinated by Indigenous women leaders from all over the world to reshape the Cdot Convention, which some folks might be familiar with. The Cdot Convention, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women. 30 more seconds and I'll be done. You know, they have identified that this convention does not protect or recognize the realities of Indigenous women and girls. It doesn't mention Indigenous women and girls. It doesn't mention their individual and collective rights. And so for years now, you know, organizations like FEME and the Center for Women's Global Leadership and Women's Human Rights Institute have been partnering with Indigenous women all over the world to adopt a general recommendation that would allow us to reinterpret Cdot in such a way that Indigenous women's individual and collective rights will be recognized. And importantly, they included, you know, in some of the nearly final language that I just saw recently, the rights to land, the rights to territory, resources, water, and food as women's rights, as something that the Cdot Convention should be addressing. And so this is a terrain, you know, one of the former speakers said that there's a need for us to be able to connect these issues and to see ourselves coming together across spaces. And so I think this is an exciting way, using the human rights framework, the international human rights framework, that grassroots leaders have really been taking the lead and have been charging forward with reimagining the tools that we have. And I think that's a very exciting way that we can be advancing the climate justice agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana, and all of you. That was really extraordinary. It's like fast dating, quick, and dating with the future and our present care for each other and our earth. I want to go back and give you all a chance to comment briefly because, of course, these panels are so short. But I'm going to show a short video, so you can just come in, collect yourself, using this time to show the video, to really either comment on something another panelist said, or really what you want us to know is really inspiring you this most as we head into the COP. I mean, we know there's a lot of negative things you can say about the COP endlessly. So we have that list and that analysis, but how can we approach this COP with what we want to get out of this moment? Might be a better way of phrasing it. Like, how do we gear up for this? What do you see as something that we can really focus on collectively or in your own work? It would be great to hear that. You know, and just for everyone to know, at WECAN, and I know all of these other amazing leaders, it's not that we spend our whole year doing the COP. It's actually, for us, a very small piece. We do a lot of work at the COP, and we do a lot during Climate Week, but we reforest, we protect forests all over the world. We do divestment work. There's a lot of work around food sovereignty that we do. So I don't want to overemphasize the COP, but obviously it is vital to our survival, so that's why we're focusing on it this week and Climate Week, and just to acknowledge that everyone really has an ecosystem of work that they're doing. But that's why we're focusing on that today. And what I'm going to do, while they're thinking about their brilliant answers, which they will be, is I'm going to show you a video from the COP, just for those of you, because when I asked some folks when they came in, just really like, what's it like there? And so I'm going to show this video of the last COP. And of course, there's many other faces and people to represent, but let's go ahead and show that. Thank you.
It's everything, and it's called life. This is one planet. Air shows no prejudice, water shows no prejudice, and land shows no prejudice. This is our home, Mother Earth, and we have to fight to keep her clean. Keep it.
Grassroots, frontline, and Indigenous women are gathered at COP26 to strategize and accelerate our collective efforts to halt the worst impacts of the climate crisis, to stop extractivism and protect our lands, forests, water, and our children's future. Study after study shows it's paramount to recognize that there will be no significant action on climate change until women's struggles and leadership and solutions are at the forefront. And we are seeing so much action on the ground. We were just having a session about how much women are having what looks like very small actions in their community around food security, food sovereignty, and Indigenous knowledge practices and all kinds of work that women are doing. And from a corporate perspective, it looks like nothing's going on, but when you add up all these small pieces, the communities are leading the way. But we also need to have there not be interference in these solutions.
Each of our communities carries a vast wealth of traditional ecological knowledge on how to live in right relationship with the land. In my community and in many Indigenous communities, women are critical to holding this knowledge and vital to passing that on to future generations. So it makes sense that Indigenous women's leadership is also vital if we want to save our planet. We're calling for Indigenous rights and sovereignty to be upheld in all levels of climate policy and negotiation.
Oil has been a very big issue for Indigenous communities. We have oil spills happening every month. There's no media coverage when that happens. And it's really concerning how accepted it is, not only on an international level, but also within our own countries. That's why we need to be here, so that we can tell our own stories and that we can tell you what is actually going on the ground. They're actually breaking international laws and policies that they have signed on to. And these are the same people that are here at COP and that are negotiating in our names and saying that they are representing us. They are not.
And I hear that there are two people from the extractive industry, from the fossil fuel industry here, for every one of us Indigenous people. Don't think you can buy and sell the air and think that the wind won't blow where you are too. Don't think that this sacred water will renew itself without your help. We have to be part of the sacred cycle of life. We have to move to circular economies. We have to be less selfish and more given. And we'll start the ball rolling. Are you going to catch it?
De nada servir os acordos firmados em 26 conferências, porque as emissões só continuam aumentando a cada ano. Nossos direitos continuam sendo retirados e as lideranças continuam sendo mortas por defender a Mãe Terra. É preciso acreditar na ciência, mas é preciso também valorizar os conhecimentos adicionados dos povos indígenas como ciência, porque é dentro dos territórios indígenas que está 82% da biodiversidade que ainda está protegida no mundo. Mas eles insistem em negar que a solução está nos nossos modos de vida.
Are the government leaders willing to stand up to the fossil fuel industry? 60 of the largest banks in the world have collectively financed $3.8 trillion in fossil fuel companies since the Paris Agreement. So we're, as a world, continuing to invest. Where's the regulation by the government to stop this fossil fuel financing? And the recent report by the UN Environment Program found that governments still plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than what would be consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. So there's been some commitments made here this week, but not enough.
É hora de reflorestar os nossos corações, o nosso pensamento e também as nossas ações.
Of the COP. So let's go ahead and start with you, Jacqui, and we'll just go through and take a few minutes and answer that question as you wish.
Thank you. I think that, I mean, obviously, as I started off even before, that this certainly shows that the solutions are already being advanced, that there are all of the many examples of how they're being advanced. It also illustrates the points that were made before in terms of what needs to happen in order for that leadership to flourish. I also was struck by just the unity in there. So what we were talking before about kind of the need for movement so that we build power together. So there's all these great local efforts that are happening. There is and how we kind of connect to scale and to build power to actually to overturn the extractive systems is really where I think it's pointing to kind of the need for that unifying for kind of dismantling capitalism, basically. And so so that would be maybe a kind of in some ways a question, because if we talk a lot, and there's a lot of illustration there about what's happening with building the new, and is building the new. Yeah. So how do we get to scale in terms of building a new so that it actually becomes the universal versus just alongside the continuation of the extractive capitalist economy? So that would probably be the one thing that I would kind of.
No, that's really well stated. Thank you, and really putting your finger right on it. Thank you, Jacqui.
Thank you.
Farhana?
Well, COP27 obviously has another set of milestones. It's being called the African COP and the Implementation COP, but really I think it's a moment when we acknowledge that we have not delivered on the ambitions, and we have not delivered on the legal promises that were made. The NDCs, these national plans, do not still add up to well below 2 degrees, let alone 1.5. The 100 billion, which sounds like a large figure, except now you know that actually when there are real crises that touch a country's actual perceived sense of a threat, like the Ukraine war, Germany found 100 billion straight off. It's things like that that are really eating away at the heart of the collaboration and the partnership and the honouring of these commitments that were made. Again, loss and damage was an article in the Paris Agreement that was put in place by the vast majority of developing countries insisted that we will not leave Paris without an acknowledgement that loss and damage is happening, that it's separate, and it cannot just be hidden under and called adaptation and resilience the whole time. I come from Pakistan. I'm now seeing, and you're seeing, a country as large and as resourceful as Pakistan absolutely hammered. And you know from the humanitarian world that when disasters of that scale occur, when an entire village is lost, it basically takes about 2 decades, 17 years roughly is a figure that is used, for that village to go back to what it was. It takes basically a huge lifetime. So I think if progress is not made on climate finance, on acknowledgement that loss and damage is happening and the facility is not established, then I think we will really, really be in trouble. I do want to say, look, the economics and the energy transition is happening very fast, and it is supported everywhere by people. And the cost of living crisis all over the world is showing that climate change was actually a solution to so many other problems. It was, and should have been the case that we switched to renewables, we did different building designs, we didn't now then have to choose in a country like the UK, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, like large numbers of people are choosing between heating and eating this winter. This is the result of calamitous, short-term, extractive, and leaving those on the front line, whether they're in wealthier countries and otherwise, to cope and that energy efficiency, renewables, collaboration, and economy built on solidarity is the way forward for not just climate change, but for all of our other sort of problems. So I remain hopeful that people are rising up. There's a mass number of strikes happening. People are not going to willingly allow the planet and their compatriots and those abroad, vast diasporas exist. We are really interconnected, and we are challenging and going to bring this system down. It's already collapsing around our eyes, and the public already support in their hearts and in their policies a really just and a greener transition. It's really like the politicians are out of touch, and that's the thing that we need to fight and work on together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farhana. Thank you.
Yeah, to build on that, COP is not the place, especially this coming COP. I go into it personally, trying to have real expectations, because let's be real, COP is not the place where we're going to see countries all of a sudden decide to divest and transition away from fossil fuels overnight. So these are, there's a real, I think just for me personally, like with my own, organizing goals, it's just like, what can we really achieve here? And one thing that we're going into this COP really excited about is to build up what she was just saying, is that we're excited about changing the conditions within the COP so that we are better to lead and better be heard. So NDN Collective has stepped up to be the first Indigenous sponsor of the Indigenous Pavilion. And this is, this impacts climate finance. We're putting up, we're making a stance that this space should be designed and curated and supported by Indigenous groups. Last year it was quite insulting actually to see the Indigenous Pavilion, where the Indigenous Pavilion was first of all extremely tiny. It was enclosed, whereas like the US Center or other pavilions were open air, open space, so it was a COVID hazard. It was dangerous to be in there. So we're organizing at this level of changing again the conditions so that we're better suited to organize and hold space, and also thinking about the leadership of COP. How are we talking to our governments to have tribal leaders or Indigenous leaders as negotiators within the COP space and not just civil society or observers? Next, I just want to, and I know my time's coming to an end here, but COP is happening during midterms. COP begins the 7th in Egypt of November, 7th of November, and midterms, voting day in the US is November 8th. Extremely hectic time for people like myself. So one question I didn't ask earlier when I was filling out the group is, who in this room is a voter? And that, I know some people might be from other countries or regions or have different statuses, but if you're a voter, that's something you can be doing on November 8th in the US in solidarity with us in Egypt, because again, we need leaders who are gonna work from a climate justice framework, and so just lifting up those simultaneous events, and that both are equally important. Also, the president is in town right now. Tweet at him.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jade. Thank you. Diana, you have the word.
Well, I guess one place I wanted to start with is with the question of, when I asked the question before of like, what are we pretending not to know? And I gave the sort of gracious excuse of sometimes it's a delusion and sometimes it's self-preservation, but sometimes it's very convenient to powerful people to pretend not to know what's very obvious. And you were referring to the spat that you had with John Kerry yesterday. I was opened my computer this morning and read a headline that he had gone to Senegal to address leaders of African nations and exhort them to lower their climate emissions. And in the same article, they say that they acknowledge, the reporter acknowledges that African nations are responsible for less than 0.55% of global climate emissions. So it really is sort of shocking and galling that a US policymaker could go to sort of wag the finger at African leaders for cutting their emissions without, in the same breath, being able to acknowledge the totally disproportionate historical responsibility that we're sitting with here in the US. And we are really at a disadvantage when our leadership can't even acknowledge that and won't put that front and center. Is so taken up with the notion of American exceptionalism and American innocence in all things that we can't fully look at the kind of reparation that we owe to the world for the history of carbon emissions that this country is responsible for. And so I just wanted to add that as like an inflection to the what are we pretending not to know. It's not always innocent or accidental. It's very deliberate and a strategy. And I also wanted to refer to something that the ambassador said earlier about climate justice being a human rights issue. You know, it's not only, I think, a moral imperative to say that, to acknowledge it as a human rights issue, but it's a strategic one, as I was saying as well. I wanted to make that connection to the point I had made about, you know, using human rights instruments and human rights spaces and really making use of all of the tools and platforms at our disposal. You know, this is a huge generational cataclysmic crisis that we're facing, and sometimes it can feel like the individual interventions that a person can make are
just carry on.
You see how like a little small thing can disrupt the entire, it's making my point for me that little changes can really, you know, be impactful. But just that, you know, we're all moving in our own space, in our own, you know, in our own little ecosystem around us to make the change that we want to see. And that in the aggregate, I really do believe that there's an emergence there, that in all of the different spaces that we're working in, that it adds up to something bigger and adds up to the kind of transformation that we need.
Thank you so much, and sorry for the disruption. I just wanted to thank you all very much and also point out something that's challenging not just in the United States, but let's talk about the United States, which is, you know, when we go to these international spaces like the COP, you know, we're not equal in our representation because we need to look at, as you're pointing out, the responsibilities of the United States as a historically larger carbon emitter and the responsibility that when we show up, we represent that, whether we want to or not, we represent that. And you know, how the United States does call out other governments, meanwhile, we have not done our job. And how different that is for Black people in the United States, Indigenous people in the United States, people of color in the United States. And so I think one of the things that we also need to make space for, not just at the COP, is we cannot live in a soundbite world. Things are much more nuanced. And I just wanted to point that out because we're always in that double-edged sword as coming from the United States when we go to the COP, because it is, you know, we're not all experiencing these harms and policies in the same way. And we need to look at a decolonized and anti-racist and gender-just lens so that we can really build the world that we want. And that's not going to be convenient, and it's not going to be a soundbite. It's going to take people really digging in, as these women have shared with us today, with in-depth analysis, being intersectional, connecting dots, and working collectively. And that's what you're doing, and I thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a lovely evening, and you can take a deep breath, and thank you so much for joining.